Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing another foundation review and we are taking a look at the BareMinerals Matte Foundation. Who does not remember the BareMinerals infomercials from the early 2000s where it was all about the swirl, tap, and buff? If you remember that, then you're in the right place because that infomercial was everything when I was a kid. Grab a beverage, grab a snack, let's jump into the video and you can watch me swirl, tap, and buff my way to a great complexion makeup day. To get started with today's foundation application, I've already prepped and primed my skin. As my all-over sunscreen, I used my Skin Aqua SPF, and I couldn't decide which base I wanted to use to prime my skin, so I did half and half. On the right side of my face, I have on the Mer Hydrating Illuminator, and then on the left side of my face, I have on my MAC Strobe cream. This started off as something I wanted to try because both of them are running low, and I don't know which one to repurchase, and I've always thought they were pretty similar, and in end product, in finish, they are very reminiscent of each other. The MAC is a slightly richer, thicker cream. The Mer is a little bit thinner. And this has more of a kind of pinky shine, which would be closer to the original Pink Light in MAC Strobe Cream. However, I have Silverlite, so it does appear a little bit more silvery. But in the end, once they're blended, they look pretty much the same. This is just a fraction of the cost of this one. So before I apply powder foundation, I like to do a little bit of concealing. So I'm gonna take a little bit of this Dior brightener and run it right through the inner corners of my eye, a little bit right out here. And I'll put a little bit right here. Oh, and I didn't mention this. This is from Dior. This is the Flash Luminizer Radiance Boosting Pen in 001 Pink. I'm just gonna use my finger to press it out. The stroke cream did a really good job at helping to kind of visually balance the different tones of my skin. This Dior Luminizer pen, it's a little bit more of a corrector pen. It's almost like a corrector version of the YSL2 Chocolat, but it's giving me just what I need. With BareMinerals foundation, it's best to get the best blend and to look as natural as possible to have a very hydrated base. I always like to use my MAC Fix Plus. This is the rose. You can use any of them. And then I'm gonna take a damp sponge and I'm gonna press that in. You know, I would wear this by itself. This looks really, really nice. I also like to add a little bit of glow to the skin before I do foundation. So I'm gonna be using a newer product that I picked up. This is the Lisa Eldridge Elevated Glow in the shade Pink Moon. Now, when this first released, I picked up the shade Crystal Nebula as it was the lightest shade, and it's a very workable shade for me. Although, it's a little gold, and it can almost be a fraction dark. I'm going to apply the Pink Moon anywhere I want to highlight and illuminate, because I like to do this step before I apply powder foundation. An added bonus, the Lisa Eldridge Elevated Glow has a ingredient in it she calls Film XL, which is supposed to add a little bit of a tightening effect. So that is very welcomed. And I'm gonna use the powder right under my eye. So I'm gonna run that highlighter under my eyes, and that will help to add a little bit of luminosity under the eyes, and that will help to kind of make this under eye part raised where I have my tear trough area. It will help to kind of peck that up a little bit. Okay, quite shiny. Hold on, pause. All right, better. I love the look of a good button-up shirt, but I just don't like the limited mobility they can give you. So back to my trusty sweatshirt, I'm gonna take my same sponge, pat over where I applied the highlighter. This isn't really a necessary step. It's been about 2 minutes since I applied it, and it's had a moment to sink in, but I always like to make sure everything's meshed in before I go on with the powder step. So the foundation we are talking about is the BareMinerals Matte Foundation. I have the original formula, and I don't know where it went. It normally lives in my washroom, as it's like the powder foundation I normally apply over a tinted SPF, but I can't find it. So today we are just working with the matte one, and I normally always wear the matte version as my all over base, and I will use the original version because the shade I have is fairly light, or fair light, something like that. It's the lightest neutral shade. And I normally use that right under my eyes and kind of right through here. But my all over shade will work just fine. And for that, I use shade 01 Fair, which is fair with a cool undertone. With applying this loose mineral powder foundation, you can use a lot of different brushes. My favorite is still the BareMinerals Beautiful Finish brush. It is almost like a flat top kabuki, but it has this kind of skirted perimeter. And I like to take a little bit. So this is a little bit more than I would normally use. But I like to get it in the cap and then really work my brush in clockwise, counterclockwise, really get the minerals in the brush. And then I like to tap it off. And then the BareMinerals directions are to swirl your brush, tap off the excess, and then start buffing in. I find if I buff right away, then I'm not as happy with the coverage. So I always like to start by picking a section of my face, and I'll stipple over, and then I'm gonna start buffing. Now, BareMinerals is a foundation I love. When I got married back in 2020, I was trying to decide which foundation I was gonna wear. And leading up to the day, I thought I was gonna wear either my YSL All Hours or my Chanel Perfection Lumiere Velvet. On the morning of, I was like, no, let me use my MAC powder foundation, the Studio Fix Powder Plus foundation. That's just like an Old Faithful, it's good to go. I had started doing my skin prep, and I was like, no, I need BareMinerals. So then I came in here, grabbed my BareMinerals, and that is the foundation I used on my wedding day. And then I remember I messed up, and I grabbed the shade I can't find now, which is the original formula, which is a little bit more luminous than this version, but you can make it work either way. So I ended up wearing that all over, and everything turned out really, really well. So with this foundation, it is not the quickest foundation. Powder foundation for me is definitely not as quick or easy to apply as a liquid foundation. And some people will say it's the other way for them. Some people like a powder because they feel like it's easier. But for me, powder foundation is a product that can look very heavy very, very quickly. So no matter what the powder foundation is, I have a very similar method of applying all of them, and that is to swirl my brush into the compact, tap off most of the excess, pat it on, do almost like your crumb coat, and then spend time buffing it in. BareMinerals especially, the formula is designed to be buffed into the skin, and as it warms up on the skin, it will change from that mineral powder into more of a cream finish. And as you really buff and blend it into the skin, it almost becomes imperceptible. It starts to mesh in with the skin and really melt. So here is a better example of how much I normally like to use. So just a little bit. I don't like a heaping amount because I will go through and normally layer this up quite well. So my third section is going to be the forehead. And I always like the most coverage right in the center. And then I'll start blending outwards. All right, so now that I have it all over, I have a very light layer. I would say I have a pretty solid light coverage, meaning about I have 25% coverage on my face. So now something I always do without fail with the BareMinerals, or really any powder foundation, is pick up some more and then buff over my ears. And that will just help tone down the redness in my ears to make it more in line with the rest of my face. And if you're someone who has facial hair, or you have a shorter haircut and you really like to get around the edges, I love using mineral powders like the BareMinerals around hair bearing areas because it doesn't stick to the hair. It works to mesh in to the skin under the hair. So here is an even layer all over face, ears, and neck. Second layer on the cheek. I want a little bit more coverage up high towards the center of my face. So I'm gonna start by stippling there, and then I'm gonna buff. My suggestion is, if you think you have buffed enough, slowly count to 20 or 30 and buff a little bit more. With these formulas, the more you buff, the better they are going to look. And I always take it right over my eyelid. Since it's a powder foundation, it does really, really, really well to help prep your eyes for shadow. I love the matte finish of the foundation because even though it's matte, it's not a flat matte. And if you prep your skin like I did with a more luminous base, then you're gonna really get a nice luminosity to your final product, which will make it look a little bit more like a natural finish. I've been uploading my How to Apply Makeup for Beginner series, and I think right now the first part, which is foundation and concealer, are out. But in my foundation video, I talked about the importance of getting your skin prep, meaning your skincare and your sunscreen down, and then finding your foundation and then using a primer, if needed, to bridge the gap between what your skincare does for you and what the foundation does. So with this foundation, I want it to be a little bit more luminous, so I will use more of a luminous primer to get my skin and foundation to mesh together and have the look I want. I'm happy with that. So here is my skin up close. So we have 2 layers of the BareMinerals Matte Foundation in shade 01 Fair. Now, since I don't know where that other shade is of the BareMinerals Original, I'm just gonna take my Charlotte Tilbury Powder and Sculpt brush. I'm gonna pick up a little bit of my Pat McGrath Under Eye Blurring Powder in Fair, and I'm gonna use that the same way. So I'll take a little bit right under my eyes, stipple it around, and then gently buff around, and then flick outwards. I just love that powder. It just makes the eye area look so smooth. It is, of all the Pat McGrath products I've tried, between lips, cheeks, her foundation, her concealer, her eyeshadow palettes, this under eye blurring powder is the one product I feel like everyone should try out from Pat McGrath. It is more expensive. I believe that little compact is around $40, but it's a baked product and you need such a tiny, tiny amount. So the other shade I have in this matte formula is shade C20 Fairly Medium. So it's also a cool undertone, but it's about 2 shades darker than my skin tone. What I like to do with this is take a tiny amount, teeny tiny, like you should barely be able to see it. One downside is since you work in the caps do get gruddy. I take a fluffy brush. This is a BK Beauty number 103. Same application. I'm gonna swirl my brush into the product, making sure I'm going clockwise and counterclockwise. Tap off the excess. And then I'm gonna start further back, stipple over where I would apply bronzer, and then buff this in like a bronzer. So since I'm using a foundation in the same undertone as my foundation, but just slightly darker, it's gonna allow me to create more of a realistic, natural bronzed effect. And I can buff this right into the hairline without anything looking funny or choppy. Subtle, but that's the effect. I want a subtle bronzer that doesn't look like bronzer. And when working with this powder foundation as a bronzer, I don't open the sifter. I just tip it over to the side and continue to tap until I get a tiny, tiny amount of product. And that tiny amount of product will work as my bronzer. I don't know how true this is, but BareMinerals reps have always said that as long as you keep your sifter closed, the products should not expire. So that being said, I've had this BareMinerals in shade Fairly Medium for 3 or 4 years now, and it's gonna last me, I would feel like at least another 5 years because I use such a tiny amount. This is definitely one of my favorite bronzer shades. I just never think to talk about it because it's one of those products that lives in my washroom. It's one of those things that I just grab out of habit. And if I'm getting ready on a daily basis, it's not something I think to mention. So here is the BareMinerals Matte Foundation worn in the correct shade as a foundation and as a bronzer with it, which is 2 shades darker. So to finish off, I like to take my Fix Plus again, give it a nice spritz, and then I always like to just kind of fan over my face, allow any of the surface moisture to absorb, and then I'll take my sponge very lightly, just press over, because moisture is what's going to help the powder melt into the skin and look more like real skin. So here is super up close how my skin looks with the BareMinerals Matte Foundation. It doesn't, in my opinion, it does not look like a powder. It barely looks like foundation on the skin. It's just a very beautiful foundation. So I'm gonna finish off the rest of my makeup off camera and I'll be right back to share with you the overview and my thoughts on this foundation. Alrighty, I'm back. The makeup is on. Now, let's talk about the BareMinerals Matte Foundation. The BareMinerals Matte Foundation retails for $40 for 6 grams of product, which breaks down to $6.67 per gram, and the matte formula is available in 30 shades. For reference, I use shade 01 Fair as my all-over complexion tone, and then I use shade Fairly Medium as a bronzer. Who is the BareMinerals Matte Foundation for? Honestly, I feel like anyone could make this formula work for them. It's all about your skin prep, and that's really something I say about a lot of foundations, and a lot of times a foundation can work for a multitude of different people. It just depends on how they prep their skin, and prep is everything from your skincare to your sunscreen to the primer to your application. And my preferred way to apply this is with the BareMinerals Beautiful Finish brush. I also have the Elizabeth Arden Mineral Powder Foundation brush. It's more of an angled brush, also really beautiful. That is going to give you a much more sheer application, where this allows you to build a little bit more. I really love this foundation. I mean, it's been in my life for years now. It's the foundation I chose to wear on my wedding day because even though it's a little bit more luminous, despite it being more of a matte foundation, it still looks incredibly lifelike. And my skin is more on the normal to oily side, so I naturally gravitate towards the matte finish a little bit more because I know once it warms up, it mixes with the natural oils of my skin, and I use this application method where I layer luminous products under it with a highlighting product over the top. I'm gonna get this really nice natural but slightly luminous finish, which I particularly really enjoy. If you are someone who has very dry skin or you want even more of a radiant finish, I would definitely consider the original formula. Now, who is this foundation not for? It's not going to be for someone who wants a very quick foundation application. For this foundation to look its best, you need to take the time, use small amounts, and work in your quadrants. Take your time, blend it out. When you think you've blended enough, count to 20 or count to 30 for an extra measure to really buff it into the skin. Buffing is going to bring us into the second issue. If you're someone who has a skin condition like rosacea, eczema, or psoriasis on the face, or you're someone who has a lot of touch sensitivity, or you're someone who has very dry, flaky skin that is aggravated by it being touched, it causes it to flake even more, buffing any type of the foundation on is not going to be the ideal method, because as you buff your product, you are doing micro exfoliation, because where these synthetic bristles on this brush, they're very soft. It is still a foreign product that is buffing its way against the skin. So when you're going like this and you're buffing, you are going to cause something slip, which can be irritating for some people. If you are someone who wants to use the mineral powder, or you want to get that coverage and you do have very sensitive skin, or you just want a lighter application, use a flat brush. This is the e.l.f. highlighting brush. It's a little bit tapered. You can use it to press and then just very gently buff over. And then I would advise taking a sponge that's slightly damp and then pressing over, and that will just allow it to be a little bit more gentle in the application on the skin. You're not going to get as much coverage, but it might work well. Something else I really enjoy about mineral powder foundations, things like BareMinerals, I think it's called Glow Skin Beauty, or Jane Iredale. Mineral powders are safe for post-procedure skin. Post-procedure meaning you were in a dermatology or an aesthetics clinic, you just had something done like a microdermabrasion or maybe a laser where it wasn't super invasive, but it has caused your skin to get a little ruddy and maybe you have to go back to work because it's something done on your lunch break. This is something that can be buffed on the skin without running extra risk that it could cause irritation since the skin has been roughed up intentionally. Now, that being said, if it is post-procedure, you want to make sure you're using a very clean brush. I would always advise to clients who are going to do something like this in clinic, then make sure you clean your brush well the day before, put it in a little Ziploc baggie after it's dried, and then it does not come out of that baggie until you are getting ready to apply your foundation. That way you're making sure your brush is as clean as possible before you put it onto a freshly exfoliated skin. Also, for some people are going to wonder, what's the difference between the BareMinerals Original and the Matte? Biggest difference is the original foundation, it has a little bit more mica in it, which is going to leave it looking a little bit more luminous if you want, and then the matte formula has less mica and it's going to be a little bit more matte. However, mineral powders normally have more of a luminous finish, so even the matte formula is not going to be a flat matte. You're going to have a little bit of luminosity to the skin, which can be enhanced or diminished by your base work. Something else I have found over the years is the shades in the BareMinerals Matte run a little bit darker, especially after they dry down and they have a moment to oxidize, than the original shades. So for me, I don't have a perfect match in the original formula. Shade Fair in the original formula is quite light. It looks a little ghostly on me. However, Fair in the matte formula is a really great match for me. So if you have tried out the BareMinerals Original Foundation or the Matte Foundation, I would love to know all of your thoughts and feedback in the comment section. Let me know what other powder foundations you really enjoy using. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend that you think might enjoy it, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care of yourself wherever it is you are in the world, and I will see you later. Bye, y'all.